it's just surreal. It was one of those moments that you had to be there just to experience it. And the end of the match, whether it was a win, lose, or draw, everybody was going to go home happy. So, looking forward to when NXT comes back to Green Bay again. And it is indeed one of those nights that will remain in not only my mind, but in my heart for so long. It honestly, the card in and of itself probably takes away the matches that I remember seeing in Stevens Point, where they had, I think it was Jeff Hardy, or Jeff Harvey if you're, Mike Adamle. You have, I think it was Matt Hardy versus Mark Henry, Big Show versus Undertaker. So many very interesting matches in there, but it just was really hard to, to deny that this matchup, this night right here, was just that amazing. So, going into Bullet Club, AJ Styles, Shinsuke Nakamura, possibly coming into WWE. I just got done watching the Wrestle Kingdom 10 match between AJ and Nakamura, and that matchup in and of itself, it was amazing. I honestly watched this match, and I'm thinking to myself, the audience is not that well into it, but they're so focused on the wrestling in and of itself, and that right there just sold me. And I can understand why they made that, a possible match of the year candidate, because it was really that good. I was really surprised at how Nakamura's, wrestling was and how brutal that he can be, but I guess that's why he got the name, though. I forgot what his wrestling name was. But all of the things that he did, and having AJ Styles in that match just made it that much better. And then in a house show, somebody had taken a video of AJ making an announcement that he was not confirmed for the Royal Rumble, but if there was a spot open for him, that he would go in, he would kick everybody's ass, and he would just steal the show. And honestly, right now, it seems like WWE is not going to do that and have AJ come in to the Royal Rumble match. Instead, they are possibly going to have him debuting the night after the Royal Rumble. I can understand that from a business standpoint, but I know that a lot of people are just nervous that, if he goes into Florida, a lot of people are probably not going to react to him. They're probably just going to be like, who is this guy? What is going on? So you have to remember that in Florida, that was where TNA was their home. That was where they just, stole the house and they just tore everything down. They had great matches there, like, Kurt Angle and Sting. They had AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and Samoa Joe tearing the house down. They're going to remember AJ Styles. It is not going to be one of those things where people are just going to look at, say, who's a good person. It's not like they could have Mike Bennett come in and people are just going to be like, who's this guy? That I can understand. But with AJ Styles, he actually is very well known, I believe, in the Florida area. And it's going to be one of those matches where it'd be better to have AJ debut in the Royal Rumble match, but I can understand from a business standpoint why they want to do it after Rumble, because Vince McMahon is too scared to take risks, and I guess I can understand that. But at the same time, it's just like, come on, take some chances already. You can't just keep doing the safe route every single time. It just doesn't. It really just doesn't help when you just don't take chances. You gotta take chances in order to make money. Everybody knows that. But also for NXT in Wisconsin, they had. I know I'm backtracking a little bit, but I just had to mention this one other thing. They actually had a stare down between Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. That was amazing. I'm still getting goosebumps just thinking about it, because it could be a possible sign that they're going to have these guys, mash up at WrestleMania, and I would love to see that. I think that would just be flat out amazing to have, Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn in a whatever kind of match. If you heard my last predictions that I had for, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I did a fantasy prediction of having Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens at WrestleMania, and you heard the same thing with Max on the Squared Circle podcast. He was talking about the same thing with Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. It's one of those things where it's like, it just makes sense. It makes the most sense to have those two compete at WrestleMania. It just would be a great possible final chapter between the two of them, or just a great, start to an intense rivalry they could have in WWE. But we'll just have to wait and see what WWE has to offer. So I know I was going to mention I think it was a final fantasy booking for this going into Royal Rumble, but I will save that fantasy booking for this Sunday at the Royal Rumble. But what I kind of wanted to end on was that in March, it will mark the 1-year anniversary of Pro Talk Wrestling, and I am looking forward to that. As I will talk about a lot of the memories that we've had in this past year, and so much that has gone on. But I'm going to start this little series that I'm probably going to do every other week. I'm going to take like 3 years from the start of when I saw wrestling to now, of the greatest rivalries in WWE through those years. So, like, I'll give you an example. We'll start in 2003. In 2003 was the first time that I actually saw WWE, other than a brief stint in, I think it was 2001 when they had The Rock return and he was doing the invasion deal where he was just choosing sides. I didn't consider that much to be me getting into it. I just saw it and I'm thinking, okay, this guy seems pretty cool. But in 2003 was when I got to see Raw more. I was more focused on being a wrestling fan, and then got some brief, looks in the 2004 until I got my first pay-per-view, which was SummerSlam 2004. So we're going to start with 2003. Greatest rivalry in 2003, hands down, it would have to be Kurt Angle versus Brock Lesnar. And every single match that they had in their entirety, it just was amazing. You look at their first meeting at WrestleMania 19, from the technical moves to all of the powerhouse deals that Brock Lesnar brought, to all of the technical and mat wrestling prowess that Kurt Angle brought into WrestleMania 19, even up to the major botched shooting star press that Brock Lesnar did to Kurt Angle, that still stands out as one of the most memorable moments in a wrestling match in a main event at WrestleMania. But Brock Lesnar came out victorious that night. Then you fast forward a little bit to Vengeance, in which we saw a triple threat match, but Kurt Angle regained the title. And then we move on to SummerSlam, which we see after having a huge heel turn from Brock Lesnar. He was the guy that Vince appointed that, he was going to be the beast. He's the real Brock Lesnar. He's the man who's going to destroy everybody. And just seeing Kurt Angle make Brock Lesnar tap out to the ankle lock, it was a surreal moment, honestly, because you look at how big Brock Lesnar was back then. He had only been pinned only a few times, and he had only submitted very, very limited. I think there were only 2 times that he ever tapped out, and that was against Kurt Angle at SummerSlam of that year, and also Survivor Series to Chris Benoit of that year. And it all culminated with a Iron Man match on a SmackDown, of all places, a SmackDown, which was one of the hottest brands in WWE for quite a long time. And that 1 hour long Iron Man match was just back and forth. Brock Lesnar doing this and Kurt Angle doing that. Kurt Angle got, I think, at least 1, maybe 2 submissions on Lesnar that night. I remember Brock just bashing Kurt Angle with a chair and the title belt, getting disqualified intentionally a few times just to give him a little bit more of an edge for the next fall. And even having Kurt Angle, I think actually Brock made Kurt Angle submit to the ankle lock during that matchup. And that was another surreal moment where it was just like, wow, this is one of the first times that an actual, other wrestler is using another wrestling move, is using the finisher of his opponent, and it actually worked. One of those very few times, and it just was awesome. So honestly, Brock versus Angle at 2003 was just the match and the rivalry of the year, hands down. Nobody can really deny that. So we move on to 2004. 2004 had a lot of big time rivalries. I mean, they had Triple H versus Shawn Michaels, Triple H against Eugene, Triple H against Randy Orton, or Triple H against this person, blah, blah, blah. It was a year for Raw just to be dominated by Triple H. But then on SmackDown, you had quite a few different rivalries. You had, Eddie Guerrero and Chavo, Chavo against Ray, Eddie and Brock, Eddie and Angle, Cena and Booker T. Trying to remember another great rivalry from there. I believe there was a great tag team rivalry between Rey Mysterio, Van Dam, and Rene Dupree and Kenzo Suzuki. They had a very interesting rivalry between, I think it was, what was her name? It was Tori Wilson and Kenzo's wife. What was her name? I forgot what her name was. But they had a very interesting feud, but you got to see, Tori Wilson in all her glory. Well, not in her entire glory, but you get what I mean. And that was back then when they did, bra and panties matches and evening gown matches, stuff like that. They even had a kimono match in Japan, which, interestingly enough. But the main rivalry that I think really stood out from that was the Triple H versus Chris Benoit rivalry. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, how can you say that Chris Benoit was a murderer and blah, blah, blah. You got to realize that I'm going to just say this for future reference. Anytime that I mention Chris Benoit, I'm talking about him as the wrestler, because that was the person that I had the most respect for. Chris Benoit is the person. It's harder to talk about him, especially about what happened in 2007, which even to this day it's very hard for me to even talk about. But you have to remember that back then, as a wrestler, Chris Benoit was one of the most respected, one of the most technical, one of the most very interesting men that definitely stepped in front of a WWE audience, and this was his year here. This was a great year for Chris Benoit. From his Royal Rumble victory to his match at WrestleMania, he always put on matches that were worth watching. And his matches with Triple H were hands down just amazing. From the triple threat match at Mania to the triple threat rematch at Backlash, which was very interestingly enough in Montreal, which we saw both in a matter of a month. Benoit made both Triple H and Shawn Michaels tap out in the triple threat matches. And then we saw a great matchup between Benoit and Triple H at the Vengeance of that year, and it all culminated with a huge match between the two in an Iron Man match for the world title. This matchup, again, was just back and forth of, this happened here, and despite the fact that, they had, Eugene come in and interfere, it was still a great finish to that matchup there, seeing Benoit retain the title, and it was something different. Because for the longest time, it was always, Triple H is in the World Title Series, and Triple H is doing this, and Triple H is the heel. As a heel, he was always so good, though. And it just made it that much easier for him to get booed, as well as help, put somebody over. I mean, he helped put over Chris Benoit quite a few times. So that would be my pick for 2004. 2005, there were a lot of good rivalries again in this year, because you had Cena versus JBL, you had Cena versus Jericho, Cena versus Kurt Angle, and you're seeing a pattern here. This is where Cena really started to dominate the WWE picture early on, and this is where people really started, resenting Cena for being that guy, for being the poster child for WWE. But the matchup that really stole it for me, and I just remember watching every single one of those matches, was indeed Triple H versus Batista. And it didn't matter if, it was one-sided. It was still just a really good rivalry, and the story behind it just really made the matches that much better. From Batista winning the Royal Rumble of that year, for those of you that remember, that was also the year that they had the second deal, in which it was Lex Luger and Bret Hart too, but this time it was Cena and Batista. But going from that to having, Batista do, the whole thumbs up, thumbs down deal, to Evolution turning his back on them, to their great match at WrestleMania. Was it match of the night? I think that it was actually Shawn versus Kurt Angle for that one. And people can argue that, oh, well, Shawn and, Kurt had a better rivalry than those two. The first two matches were great. the Iron Man match kind of dragged a little bit, and then their final confrontation was just like,